Hey, Rock Valley Chapel, this is Pastor Tim, continuing our series in Ecclesiastes. Looks like we probably got 3 or 4 more segments left before we can close the book on this fantastic book. But I'm seeing that some people are viewing the most latest one, or I should say the most recent one, so I will be continuing today, and we're going to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. So let me read these to you, and then I'll make a few comments. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Well, what we have here is a handful of really important insights, I think, into practical economic practices. And these things might strike us as strange that we would read in the Bible, advice for how to handle our money, manage our money, except that I think we all know that money is a dominant element in our lives, and as a matter of fact, the Bible speaks to it very frequently. One of the very most important topics that the Bible treats throughout the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. So here we have some practical advice for how to manage our money. And we'll take a look at the first 2 verses here. Casting bread upon the waters, that can be a little bit strange. What's going on here? I almost wonder if this is where the beginning of the idea of bread equating to money comes from. You know, some people say this person's got some bread, he's got a lot of bread, referring to money. Obviously, money buys bread, buys food, buys all the things that we need for life, but I wonder if maybe this is a place where the reference to bread and economics comes into play, because what's happening in verse 1 and 2 is Kohelet, our author, probably Solomon, is suggesting that we diversify our portfolios. And so cast your bread upon the waters means take some risks, send it out to sea, invest it in things that you cannot see. Some of it might come back to you, maybe none of it will, maybe all of it will. But take chances in areas outside of your complete comfort zone. And verse 2 also reinforces that by saying, give a portion to 7 or even to 8. So diversify into 7 or 8 different areas, and obviously the idea there is that if 1 or 2 of them have a tough year or a tough season, the other 5 or 6 will be able to make up for it. And so the more we're diversified, the more we protect our investments and our income. And boy, isn't that true right now in this whole COVID-19 situation? Pretty much everybody who has any money invested has suffered a lot. Things are starting to rebound in recent days and weeks, and that's a good sign. But a person who's had money in gold, for example, has probably been able to ride this out a little bit more in terms of one of their portfolio options, certainly in other precious materials as well. And so it's important to try to diversify between maybe some riskier stocks and some low-risk stocks for those who are engaged, and maybe even just keep some money in the bank where people earn a very, very low interest. And so the idea there, again, diversify to protect your income. I think in verse 3 we have the idea that some things are just going to happen and there's nothing you can do about it. When you see clouds full of rain, you're going to get wet. It's just going to happen. And if that ruins your day or ruins the work you've been doing in the yard or ruins a vacation or whatever, accept it. And then the second part of that, if a tree falls this way or that way, that's just the way it is. And so there are some things we just can't do anything about. One of our kids wanted to go to with their friends recently to go and spend some time at a nearby lake and just enjoy the day, but it rained on them. And so they just accepted that, and they decided to go a different day when the weather was better. It's just what happens. It's the way it works. And that's also something you might apply to investments. When you invest in certain things, there's so many things one can't control. And once again, here we are in our COVID-19 stage of life, and there are just some things you cannot control. And so if you see clouds that got rain in them, you're going to get wet. And when trees fall to the north or south, that's just where they lay. Things just happen like that, all part of God's sovereignty and his providential care over the universe. I think verse 4 is a little bit about being willing to take some risks as well in life. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. If you're not going to plant, or for that matter harvest, until the weather is absolutely perfect, pretty good chance you're not going to get seed in the ground, and you're not going to get out there to harvest when you need to. And if you don't get seed in the ground, you're not going to get any produce. And if you don't get out and harvest and wait and wait and wait, your food's just going to rot out in the fields, and it won't do you any good. So the idea here is, even when things don't look ideal, you got to get out there. You can't just be afraid. You can't look for perfect conditions. I think we're all kind of experiencing that a little bit right now as we are getting a little bit more comfortable with the fewer cases of COVID in our communities, and we're venturing out some more, and it's a judgment call, whether to go out, whether to wear a mask, whether not to. And for those who decide not to do anything, if they're the ones that aren't going to get anything done, perhaps right now, and as long as they can accept those consequences, well, that's certainly the decision they have to make. But I think Solomon is trying to say here, you can't wait for perfect conditions to get out and start to do what you're supposed to do. In this case, he's talking about agricultural activities, but every single one of us knows that it applies to our own lives. We can't keep the church closed, for example, indefinitely, waiting for a perfect time where there's no threat of COVID or no threat of the flu or no threat of any kind of threat that we can conceive of. And so you've got to use good judgment and be willing to step out, even if it's a little windy or even if it's some rain coming. You got to be willing to get out and do what you've been called to do. Verse 5 is a fantastic verse for those of us who support a pro-life agenda, and we all should. We don't know how the Spirit of God comes to the bones of an infant. How wonderful that is, especially when we think about it in the womb of a woman. When does that happen? Science can't really tell us everything behind this, but we do know that once that egg is conceived, we've got life. And but just as it's a mystery to know when the bones start to form, so we don't know how God functions in the rest of life. It's a mystery why some people are gifted in one thing but not gifted in another. It's a mystery why some people have more hair and others are balding. It's a mystery how people come together, are attracted to each other, get married, and some can have kids and some can't. It's a mystery how some kids in just horrific ways get cancer and others don't. It's just, life is strange. Life is hard to understand, and we can certainly point to Job as somebody who didn't understand some of the elements of life with respect to why he was suffering when, after all, he was somebody chasing after God. We just simply don't know. It's a mystery when bones enter into the baby, and it's a mystery how life happens, and we just need to accept that God is sovereign, God is in control, he has a plan, and so long as we follow him and trust him, we can say with certainty that we are useful to him for his plan. And if we can be content with that, then we can be more content with the circumstances of life. Finally, verse 6, in the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you don't know which way will prosper. This is a wonderful example of not putting all your eggs in one basket. One should be active in a few areas. One never knows when a primary job, for example, will be taken away. Well, do you have a talent? Do you have a skill? Do you have a hobby or something else that can make some money? You might have to tap into that. And so it's important to not just rely on one thing. Again, all of these verses really have one way or another to do with sort of how we look at our finances and how we protect our income. And so one of the things that we've done with our kids, for example, is we've encouraged them to be really have some degree of facility in musical instruments. So they have a gift or a talent, or to develop an interest in a hobby that may be able to make them a little money on the side if they need to, so that if one job gets lost for one reason or another, maybe out of their control, they can earn income in another area. A person can go to college, get a master's degree, even a PhD, and feel like they're set. But at the end of the day, the person with a PhD who gets released from college because they're not making enough money is going to have to find his or her way of making some money. And if they're gifted in playing an instrument, they might be able to go out and teach lessons or be a part of a band. Or if they're able to work as a carpenter or any kind of tradesperson, they're going to be able to find work, at least part-time, to kind of make ends meet. And so the idea here is don't be too dependent on just one job or one skill set. So even at night, do something to advance yourself, whether it's reading, studying, learning a new language, taking courses, whatever it might be, to diversify your skill set so that you're always marketable in season and out of season. That's really the idea there, I think, in verse 6. And so here we have some really good counsel from Solomon, from ultimately God, for how to be wise in managing our money and our talents so that ultimately we can live a life that's enjoyable. God wants us to live an enjoyable life. We know that. We know that living an enjoyable life is first rooted in trusting God, following God, and accepting that He has called us to a high purpose, which is to tell the world about His Son Jesus, so that we can participate in that great event that we will one day all see in some way, one way or the other, where every knee in heaven and on earth and under the earth will declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God. God bless you guys. Look forward to our next section. We'll be in Ecclesiastes 11, verses 7 through 10. Take care. Bye-bye.